Hello, Fiedelbogen here. To my fellow workers in the vineyard, worldwide, greetings. Today's talk is called Two Feminist Fallacies. This concerns two common errors of thinking which most feminists stumble into while they are scrambling to decipher what is happening to their world, why things are slipping out of their control, and how they might regain that control. I call these two feminist errors of thinking the crosshairs fallacy and the moral perfection fallacy. Now, when I call them fallacies, I don't mean they are strictly logical fallacies in the academic way. That is, I do not pretend to add them to the likes of ad hominem, circular argument, straw man, and so on. No, for my purpose, these new items are fallacious simply because they are mistaken, because they initialize thinking upon a foundation of error and trigger downstream error in conjoined or collateral regions of understanding. I am keen to call attention to them because they so strongly mark the behavior of feminists in particular, especially those who are describing or attacking the non-feminist revolution. So, my motivation to speak is political. That is, as opposed to personal. I will speak first of the crosshairs fallacy. Feminists fall into this mistaken thought way owing to their confusion and their consequent desire to simplify. In a word, they oversimplify. Beset by hostile forces which they cannot fathom, they try to align a narrow target, as it were, in the crosshairs of a sniper scope. Their deluded hope is that the sum and substance of what threatens them lies within that constricted radius, and that if only they neutralize the target area, their troubles will go away and perpetual revolution will resume its course unhindered. Among feminists, the crosshairs target of choice is the cyberspace group known as MRAs. Feminists are obsessed with MRAs as a kind of red menace. They sense, quite rightly, that larger social forces are mobilizing against feminism and against what feminism has inflicted on the world. And, with utmost naivete, they have undertaken a shorthand analysis that would make these things mentally easier to cope with. The crosshairs fallacy springs from a childish belief that the vital force of the non-feminist revolution concentrates in a point source, for example, a certain community of websites, and that if you neutralize this particular head, then the snake will expire. But that is a gross misunderstanding, akin to attacking a prominent mushroom in complete ignorance of the underlying mycelium, which spreads for miles. For even if you kill, imprison, or pink list every suspected MRA on the planet, you will not have made a dent in the cultural forces which generated MRAs in the first place. Furthermore, you will have overlooked a host of other threats to feminism from other directions. Accordingly, it will not do to sit around in feminist echo chambers mocking the bizarrities of presumptive MRAs who have posted comments on the internet. For such words are not spoken in a vacuum, nor do they enter the universe through a side door from nowhere. These things occur in a context, and context matters. It should go without saying that such unsavoriness is the consequence of something. Even a feminist could agree on that much, but what a feminist cannot hope to fathom without ceasing to be a feminist is that these things originate from a source in the objective world which the feminist narrative is not competent to explain. Got that? The feminist narrative is not competent to explain these things. So the feminists have arrived at a false simplicity. The problem is not that the facts of the case are unduly difficult to comprehend, but that they are difficult for a specifically feminist mindset to process without a prerequisite self-knowledge and the sense of guilt that this knowledge would instill. It is to avoid guilty self-knowledge, then, that the feminists project their anxieties onto an abstracted and quasi-mythical group of people, as onto a lightning rod. To be sure, MRAs do exist in various forms, but the MRA, as an abstraction, as an archetypal construct, is mostly a figment of the feminist imagination. And MRAs, whether concretely or archetypally, are only one piece of a much larger jigsaw puzzle. The more advanced non-feminist philosophers, by the way, do not make the equivalent error in their thinking about feminism or feminists. Rather, they have evolved a sophisticated conceptual model of feminism as a socio-political organism, a subject which I have covered elsewhere. I will speak next of the moral perfection fallacy. The feminists wish to discredit their enemies as simply as possible, and so they look for anything that is morally amiss about their enemies in order to expedite that project. This is fallacious, mainly because it is shallow, for there is no way that any sizable demographic sector can be a vessel of moral purity straight through, and the non-feminist sector is no exception. You will find the complete moral spectrum of human nature among those who oppose feminism, because we are talking about humanity en masse, and when did humanity en masse ever include less than a complete moral spectrum? That's all of human nature. Whatever human nature contains, it's all in there. And the world after feminism will contain all of human nature, just as the world with feminism contains all of human nature, and just as the world before feminism contained all of human nature. The allness of human nature is something that will be with us always. You have my word about that. Furthermore, you should understand that feminism is a utopian worldview and a utopian project. It upholds the abstract ideal of progress and holds the rest of the world accountable to a certain program which it dictates in the service of this ideal. So, when the rest of the world is slow to measure up, it counts as proof in the feminist mind that the rest of the world is morally invalid and thus invalidated without warrant to challenge feminist claims. This mode of thinking on the part of the feminists is entirely circular and self-referential. In practice, all feminist assessment of human fallibility is made according to a feminist yardstick, meaning that no case of moral dysfunction is permitted to operate within its own frame of reference. Things are never bad for independent local reasons, but always for reasons which feminism itself arrogates the sole authority to enunciate. In the feminist utopian worldview, all things are either progressing toward a projected feminist future or rebelling against that future in some way. No alterity is admitted, and by default, any possible theory of sin or transgression can only be a feminist theory, imposed by feminists and for feminists, in the service of feminism upon the rest of the world, meaning the non-feminist world. And so the feminists cannot see the world as it exists in itself, but only as it appears through the lens of feminist theory. In consequence, feminist dealings with the non-feminist sector amount to a coercive falsification of reality injuriously imposed on others. I will say that again. It is a coercive falsification of reality, injuriously imposed on others, imposed on them in a way that injures them. That's what feminism does. For it ought to be obvious that all manner of folk may be aggrieved at feminism for all manner of reasons. That's right, a lot of people don't like feminism, and they have a lot of reasons. There's a lot of diversity going on there, you know. It is not a bit obvious, however, that all of these reasons are invalid merely because some of them are proffered on questionable grounds by questionable people. Coercive falsification is therefore a cardinal sin upon feminism's doorstep. Feminism coercively falsifies things. In fact, some feminist is listening to this talk right now and in his or her mind coercively falsifying everything, lying to himself or herself, and then lying to other people about what Fiedelbogen was saying in his audio narrative. Coercive falsification is a cardinal sin upon feminism's doorstep. Coercive falsification, is first imposed, then reacted against by an aggrieved world, like I'm reacting right now, and imposed once more in rejoinder to that aggrieved reaction, which to the feminist mind is deemed a transgression. So, feminism coercively falsifies the world doesn't like this, the world reacts against this, and then feminism turns around and doubles down on the coercive falsification. And the whole process is cyclical, and it builds and builds and builds, and it gets worse. With each round, as you can see, the falsification grows, but always at the expense of any feminist claim to moral authority. Note that well. Feminist moral authority erodes and undermines itself in the process of coercively falsifying the world around it. The feminist claim to moral authority, the pretension to moral authority, I should say, crumbles relentlessly. We just have to watch it happen and encourage it to happen. So, in sum, feminism has a toxic moral agency within the social ecology. The moral perfection fallacy should inspire us to quote the famous gospel verse which advises plucking the beam out of thine own eye before thou pluckest the mote out of thy neighbor's eye. A concluding word. The crosshairs fallacy and the moral perfection fallacy are interrelated. They are part and parcel. They intertwine. They have territory in common. They illuminate each other. However, I will leave it to you, the listener, to ponder this and work out the ramifications for yourself. Take care. Fiedelbogen. Out. Forces which they cannot fathom, they try to align a narrow target, as it were, in the crosshairs of a sniper scope. Their deluded hope is that the sum and substance of what threatens them lies within that constricted radius, and that if only they neutralize the target area, their troubles will go away and perpetual revolution will resume its course unhindered. Among feminists, the crosshairs out of their control and how they might regain that control. I call these two feminist errors of thinking the crosshairs fallacy and the moral perfection fallacy. Now, when I call them fallacies, I don't mean they are strictly logical fallacies in the academic way. That is, I do not pretend to add them to the likes of ad hominem, circular argument, straw man, and so on. Hello, Fiedelbogen here. To my fellow workers in the vineyard, worldwide, greetings. Today's talk is called Two Feminist Fallacies. This concerns two common errors of thinking which most feminists stumble into while they are scrambling to decipher what is happening to their world, why things are slipping or attacking the non-feminist revolution. So, my motivation to speak is political. That is, as opposed to personal. I will speak first of the crosshairs fallacy. Feminists fall into this mistaken thought way owing to their confusion and their consequent desire to simplify. In a word, they oversimplify. Beset by hostile fun. No, for my purpose, these new items are fallacious simply because they are mistaken, because they initialize thinking upon a foundation of error and trigger downstream error in conjoined or collateral regions of understanding. I am keen to call attention to them because they so strongly mark the behavior of feminists in particular, especially those who are describing